in this historic place, the Antioch Missionary Baptist Church. And as I reflect, to think that this very place started while the Civil War was going on. They call it the War Between the States. Around September the 10th in 1863, the year of the Emancipation Proclamation, some former slaves who was looking for a better day wanted to serve their God in a brush arbor just in front of this church, established the Antioch Missionary Baptist Church. Now there was a man named Reverend Edmund Rogers. He was what we call one of the pioneer black African American ministers. Born in Scriven County, later residing in Effingham County, he went around in horse and buggy. Now, you know, it was a challenge, and mules and wagon. It was a challenge during that time because not everyone was in agreement with African Americans meeting. And if you review his life, you will know that he ran into some trouble. Even his mode of transportation was destroyed because he was trying to organize people to serve a living God. And so we do pay great respects to him and want all of you to know that this year, 2019, represents the 400 years that African Americans been in this country. It was in August, mid-August 1619, that 20 Africans landed, not voluntarily, at near Jamestown, Virginia, Fort Comfort. And that is the origin of slavery in these United States. And so the Willow Hill Heritage and Renaissance Center and African American Museum near Portal is celebrating these accomplishments or commemorating what our people have gone through over 400 years. We want to invite you this Labor Day weekend and every weekend in September to come and visit us as we have a very dynamic program prepared to commemorate that. So we want to give thanks to those, Pastor Lawrence, we appreciate you opening the doors here, making us feel so welcome. I was here last Sunday past.
That's correct.
And the spirit was wonderful. The discussion in the Sunday school was quite vibrant. And so I quite enjoyed that. And also you were here as well, and we were so glad to see you. So if you would come out as we do the commemoration, I want to thank Dr. Gail Jackson for the work she's done in the program, and Ms. Millie German, she's always a trooper, just making contact, and she's a historian in her own right, and so I appreciate that, and all of you who have come out today. Before we move forward, I was always told it was a good idea to invoke the throne. And who better to do that than the Reverend Richard A. Lawrence, Doctor of Divinity, to come forward and give a prayer and bless the kind of work we're doing. We are visiting all of the 35, we keep finding one here and there, known African American cemetery in Bulloch County. And we're looking especially for the formerly enslaved, to recognize them. There's an expression in our community which said, you are not truly dead until they stop calling your name. And so we want to keep calling the names of our ancestors because they worked so hard to pave the way for us today. And so today, as we will be going out into the cemetery, you have approximately 561 graves in your cemetery. Yet 198 of them are not marked, roughly about 35%. So I'm glad that many of you have come out so that you can help us put name and give recognition to those who are resting for that great beyond that. And so thank you so much. And then after the pastor gives the invocation, I want to ask Mr. Aiken, who is from this community, to come forward and give some words.
Okay.
Pastor.
You bow your heads, please. Father God, we come now very briefly to give you thanks. For this occasion, we first recognize your fatherhood. And I want to thank you for those who felt it beyond robbery to break away from their various schedules, come this way to show recognition of this historic occasion. We thank you for each individually, all collectively. Pray you bless now Dr. Jackson, who will be our facilitator. We move forward, and we also will give you the praise, as always, in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Aiken. We want to come by and please identify who you are and your connection to this community, and maybe a word or two what you know about it.
Okay, my name is Edwin Akins. Of course, I'm from the Akins community, and where you are in the middle of the Akins community. If you go on television and you see Akins community on the weather map, well, this is where Akins community is. This is the Akins community. The Akins have been in this area here since probably 1820, 1830. And my grandfather, John Benjamin Aiken, born in 1869. And then, of course, there's been the Akins community here ever since. At one time, he owned about 2,100 acres right in this community. So all the land that you see around the Antioch Church belongs to the Aiken family, with the exception of about 25 acres that is still within the descendants of the Akins community, so we're still here. Antioch Church has been a steadfast post in this community for, as you know, a long time. There was one thing that we were always taught, remarking some of you earlier talking about seeing the buggies or the tractors or whatever going by this church along this road back to the back fields. One thing we were always taught, to respect this church, respect the cemetery, and if there was any time that there was a service going on, be it service, be it a funeral, a wedding, or whatever, if we came by this church, we would keep our mouths shut. We would not talk, we would not make any comments in talking about it, because this was a respected place of God. And we honored this church. And as a representative from the Akins community, I welcome you to the Akins community here. I wish I could stay and be with you today, because I'd love to know the history of this church, being raised around here. But unfortunately, my wife and I, we're on our way to Tennessee tomorrow, so we were traveling today. But in the meantime, we hope you have a good stay here. It's my pleasure to welcome you, and it's good to see some familiar faces again. And if there's anything I can ever do to help you, please call the lady here, the green, I would call her name, but she has my name and address and everything, so contact her and she can contact me.
What other names are associated with the Akins family?
Well, my grandfather, John Benjamin, married the Williams family, the George Williams family. They're located on South 301, that area down below is the Williams family. And so my father was John Lehman. My father, John Lehman, was the oldest of 4 boys that John Benjamin had, and he was the oldest one. If you go on Mud Road and you see where the big house is, a 2-story house, our house was the next one on the left, and that's where I was born and raised, up there. The big house was Uncle Joe's house. He was the youngest boy. And then as you turn left and go to the crossroad, immediately on your left was where my Uncle Ollie. His name was Ollie. And then where the old store was, across on the right, that was my Uncle Elijah. As mentioned, my grandfather had 4 sons. And so in 1934-35, he bought the last corner of that crossroads so that each one of his sons could have a corner of that crossroads. And so that's how the Akins community been. And if you're going towards the Arco Road, the place on the right where all the pine trees are, that now belongs to me.
Were you associated with the Black Creek Church?
Black Creek Church, my home church, Upper Black Creek Church, yes. Okay. Black Creek Church was founded in 1802. I have my great-grandfather, grandfather, my father. I have uncles and aunts bear there, and all my family, Aiken family bear the Upper Black Creek Primitive Baptist Church. So Very familiar with that church.
Were you connected to the Goodmans or the Combs in any way?
I am not connected to them, but I know very well who you're talking about.
Okay.
I know very well the Goodman family, the Cone family, and as a matter of fact, Miss Cone here, I've been knowing her for a long time, and this lady here, I've been knowing her and some of the others, and I tell you what, it was a surprise and a shock to me to know that this man, this woman over here, this man grew up in this church, remember this church.
Yes.
I had
The
no-
current mayor of Statesboro, Georgia. Yes. I'm gonna let you know who this man is.
I had no earthly idea that he was from this community. No wonder he turned out so well. But, yeah, that's good, but yes, I am very familiar.
Well,
Dr.
thank you
Jackson,
so
hope
much.
you have a good visit
Thank
today.
you.
And I'm looking forward to getting some information from this lady. I will put it in my brochure and
Yes, sir.
everything as I build it on this. Thank you
Well,
very much.
thank you, my pleasure.
Good to have you with us.
And part of why I was asking the question, because many of the Goodmans and the Cones who were buried here were into slavery to the Goodmans who were at Black Creek Church. And that church is important in primitive Baptist history.
Absolutely.
As there was a division between the Hepzibah and the Canucci Association,
Right.
which was the beginning of that whole thing on missions and the origin of the Missionary Baptist Church. And so that's a really, really important piece of history. So I just wanted that amplified.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
One other thing too, on the Aikens property, there were two cemeteries on this Aikens property. One was the Gruber Cemetery, and a two-story house immediately across the road was the Gruber Cemetery. And back behind us, in these fields behind us, which was across the branch from the big house in the Gruber, there was a Jones Cemetery. And the Jones Cemetery was a large cemetery. Evidently, they expected a lot of people to be there because it was over an acre for a cemetery. And you know, you put a lot of people in acres.
And that's very interesting because Gruber was the gentleman who donated for $1 the acre of land in 1879, on which Antioch Church is built. Now, prior to that, they were meeting out front in a brush arbor. And so in 1879, Mundy Joyce, John Henshaw, and Warren Jones were the deacons that received the church from a Mr. Gruber.
Well, that's interesting because I did not know. My grandfather in 1908 purchased 1,200 acres at one time from the Gruber family, Sam Gruber and his descendants. And so I did not know exactly where this church came from, who was originated. So I'm glad to know that.
Yes, it's from the
Glad to know
Gruber
that.
family. And I think those connections, as we start to study history, we see that there are very strong connections between African American families and Caucasian families as they live in the same areas. And I think now is the time that we speak more about that, to show these kinds of relationships as we study the true history of what happens in these parts of the United States. And so I really am thankful, and I would like to get in touch with you again to
Please do.
learn more about the Aikens, and thank you for allowing us in your community.
Right. Are there any Robertson here in Mr. Pete Robertson, Peter Robertson? Anybody remember that family?
Yes.
You remember that family?
Yes.
Well,
We
they
still
live
got some
here.
of the members here.
You
Still
remember?
some of the family here.
Oh, it's still some of the family? I believe one of them died about 2 years ago. And
Willie did.
a couple of years ago.
Willie
And
Ray.
anyway, the reason why I mentioned that is that, yes, I grew up with the Robertson family, Mr. Pete Robertson and that family and everything. I have very fond memories of working together in the field, chopping cotton, picking cotton, tobacco, peanuts and everything. So, yes, they were a very important part of this.
Where did you go to school?
Went to school at Stilson High School. I was last graduating class at Stilson High School,
Which was what year?
1955.
Okay, well, thank you so very much. And again, you see, we learn a lot of different things.
Good history of mine, both of you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We appreciate that. Thank you. And again, we are so honored to have the mayor of Statesboro here and his lovely wife. And he must come forward and say a word or two. He was not on the program, but since I know he's here and he's related to the McLeod family, many of them are buried out there, so I'd love for you, Mr. Mayor, just to come and talk about your family connections.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Antioch is home for me. My earliest memories is growing up in this church. As a matter of fact, I used to come down with my great granddaddy and my great grandmother. And my granddaddy would go over here, sit on the deacon side.
Your names now, your great grandfather.
Will McLeod and Estella McLeod used to sit on this side over here. But our whole family came through here, and all of their offspring, grandchildren, so forth and so on. They all are buried in the back here. So you're gonna see some Menzies, you're gonna see some McLeodens, all of those, Elnita Hunter, Don McLeod, and all of them. They're all buried right back here. So that's the one thing we know. You know, we may stray off, but when we come back, this is where the bus stops, right here. So absolutely.
And Estella's maiden name was?
Her maiden name was Mitzi. But her parents were her mother's last name was Summerlin. And of course, her father's last name was Mitzi as well. So we could trace our family roots in Bulloch County at least back to 1891, but we think Alexander Mitzi was in 1820 in Bulloch County. So our family has been here for generations.
Are
so
you related to the Summerlins at Register?
That's what she's originally. When I was little, we used to go over to Register and met her and so forth and visit Summerlins and Menzies. So but as time has progressed, we've kind of separated a little bit.
Yeah.
But that's the area.
Yeah,
that
that's
they
where
were
the
from.
Summerlins come
Yeah,
from.
Summerlin. Yeah. Her name was Hester Summerlin.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Mr.
All right,
Mayor.
thank you.
We appreciate that. The spontaneity of the moment is important, as you see. So we thank you. And at this time, we're going to ask Ms. Nell Johnson Henley with the Antioch Baptist Church to come forward and lead us into the songs of the heart.
I don't know when God's gonna do it. I don't know how God's gonna fix it, but I know God's gonna make a way for me. He's gonna do it, my Lord. He's gonna do it. Yes, yes. He's gonna do it. Victory. Good morning.
Good morning.
How you all doing? Well, good. I think I tried to sing every song I could get in my mind. And this morning I woke up at 4 o'clock. And I'm laying up there in the bed just singing. And this all and looked like somebody want me to sing, this is the song. And I said, God, just fix it, because look like it would be something on that side and something on this side. But I hope it be everything good on this side while I got you here.
All right.
So, you look over all mistakes. I will be singing, Take My Hand, Precious Lord.
Oh, yes.
And that's way back on the
Way
song.
back.
Before I come into the world, and I've been in the world, y'all. I'm so young, so y'all wouldn't know how old I am. Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn through the storm, through the night. Lead me
Take my hand.
Precious Lord.
Precious Lord.
Lead me towards Him. Precious when my life is almost gone, as I travel, Lord, hear my cry, hear my call.
Oh, yes.
Hold my hand,
Hold my hand.
precious Lord. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me when the night
Oh Lord.
joy is near
Oh Lord.
and the night appears
Oh, yes.
and the tears
Mm-hmm.
and the day past and gone.
Oh Lord.
At the river, Lord, I stand.
Oh Lord.
Oh, please guide my feet.
Yes, Lord.
Hold my hand. Take my hand. Lord, I want you to take my hand and lead.
Oh, yes.
Lord, Lord, I want you to lead me on.
Yes.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. When I hear that song, I hear the singing of the formerly enslaved.
Yeah.
Looking up for that better day. Take my hand, Lord. The days were long, the work was hard. There were laws on the books that say that you're not supposed to be educated. You were vessels of work.
That's right.
Going back from the days of the transatlantic slave trade, you were bought here to be a part of the economic system of these United States. Yet your hands helped build the capital at Washington, D.C., and you established the economic empire of these United States through your hands and your work. And yet you were looking for a better day. Take my hand, precious Lord, and lead me on. And that song was stimulated by Thomas Dorsey when he lost his wife in death. He had been traveling. And when he came back, she was gone. And the first thing came to his mind, because he lost the baby also, it was in childbirth. First thought was to curse him. Then he said, oh no,
All right.
don't curse God, but precious Lord, take my hand and lead me on. And so that is a message for us even today. So thank you, the bird of paradise, for your music. You truly, truly touched our hearts.
Amen.
Now I'm just going to give you a brief history, and it's written on the back of the program prior to us going out to the cemetery and walking the sites and calling the names of those we know there. But I spoke to you earlier about Emmett Bryant, and he not only established this church, but he went around establishing a lot of churches. And it was during the 1860s when you had to be ordained as a minister to be over church. So there was a Reverend Edinfield and McCall. These were white ministers, and they were in, I believe it was the Greenville, may not got the Goodwill Church or something in Savannah. And they asked, and there were several blacks asked and requested to be ordained as ministers. And those requests were granted. And then these individuals, Emmett Bryant and others, traveled around Scriven, Effingham, Bulloch counties, establishing churches for African Americans. And Antioch being one of the first, because it was started during the era of slavery. And during Reconstruction, And just after slavery, there was a wealth of other churches all around these counties that were established. But Antioch holds a very, very special place as being the first. Now, even though he was the founder and organizer of this church with the Reverend Kemp, he was not the first pastor here. A Reverend J.E. Holmes, who served 16 years, was the first pastor of this church. And as I was doing some research, I seem to think he's buried at Laurel Cemetery in Savannah, Georgia, where a lot of African Americans are buried, a lot from this area. And so there was a school, Arcola School, near here at one time. Don't know what the association would be necessarily, but it was an African American school near this area where many members of this church would have gone. So we talked a little bit about Mr. Gruber, and I thank you for sort of tying that connection in for him. But he said for $1, it must be for church purposes. If any other thing, then it goes back to the Gruber family. So obviously it must have been proper because it's still with the church itself, so we appreciate that. Now remember that Warren Jones, Monday Joyce, and John Hanshaw were all former slaves born in the 1830s and 1840s. Now when you look at the history of Antioch, you have to know that the turpentine industry here in Bulloch County had a huge impact on this church because many North Carolinians, South Carolinians came to this area to work in the naval industry, which was turpentine. And many would leave their families, one or two, and the rest of their family would remain in North Carolina. The Lumbee Indians, as we were talking earlier, which was a group of Indians in North Carolina, Mr. McFadden, I really believe, since you came from the exact same area, that you were part of that as your family came down and established Harmony Baptist Church. But many of them came and they're buried here. Also, as I was looking at the history of Antioch, I see when you look at some of the death certificates that you can find of former slaves buried by family. They wouldn't go through a mortuary. So when family buried them, they would sometimes have a wooden stub, and there's one out in the church. You want to make cemetery, want to make sure you see that. But a lot of time it would not have a name on it. So this church has great importance, and so after the founding of this church and a few others, in 1868 was the establishment of the Pilgrim Missionary Baptist Association. That was at Guyton, Georgia. So that was an important accomplishment because it was a way where all of the churches could come together. In 1880, at the site in Guyton, was the establishment of a high school for African Americans in Effingham County. That school would go from 1880 to 1936. Now many folk in Bulloch County, and I can give you one example, Eva Jones Moore, who taught at Willow Hill School, was a student at Guyton. Guyton, the school there had a printing press, and so it was able to publish a lot of the circulars, and it also had a journalism class, and it was a really, really important part of the education of this community. And all moderators of the Pilgrim Missionary Baptist Association would be the headmaster of the school. Okay, until that changed later on under, I believe, J.W.H. Thomas, who spent quite a bit of time there. So that history is closely entwined with this history. Down on Mud Road, there was a place where you would go and be baptized years ago. And Mr. Grant, we always appreciate the great history you have provided with us, and we're going to let him talk a little more later as we get into the cemetery, because a family here in this area, Black Creek, moved up to the Willow Hill community. Ada Reed, Cody Reed, Mr. Joe Reed, if any of you know them, and they established lives there and attended the Willow Hill School, but always came back to this church. And that's how I knew, because as a little lad, I came through Mr. Joe to visit the Antioch Baptist Church because that was so important. So the rest of the history you can read. We're glad that Pastor Lawrence is the current pastor. He's had a great tenure here and has done some great things. If you look in the program, you're going to see the formerly enslaved graves that we can find. And we know there are more, they're just unmarked. And the teachers, a couple of ministers there, but primarily, this is one of the largest number of soldiers out of all of the cemeteries that we have visited so far. And this is our 7th cemetery. We've been to Mount Pisgah, Old Bethel, Scarborough Grove, Johnson Grove, St. Mary, and the Lee Cemetery, which was the family cemetery. So at this time, any comments? We're going to go out to the cemetery. Mr. Grant, did you want to, Gregory Grant, say anything prior to, okay. Anybody else have any comments? You feel free to say it. Glad to see the professors here. Mr. Hartville, we'd be glad to see you as well. You've been to several of our, and you have a very strong interest in the soldiers buried there, so we appreciate all of that. Mr. Eugene Lanes, it's good to see you as well. Okay, with that in mind, Mr. Earl Donaldson is not here at this moment, but usually what he would do is make music as we walk to the cemetery. So what we're going to do is go ahead and go out to the cemetery and visit many of the graves there. And there are so many burials there, so we're not going to do every one, but we would be interested if anyone here who would know who is buried someplace and there's no marker, then we're certainly going to make note of that. Okay? Thank y'all so much. And then at this time, we're going to go ahead and visit our cemetery. And we'll start on this side over here.